Tony Ferguson just lost to Paddy Pimblett by decision, and I'm truly sad, but I'm also angry and frustrated. Not angry and frustrated by Tony's performance, I'm angry and frustrated because of society. Society, yet again, doesn't understand the bright mind that the GOAT, Tony Ferguson, has. The internet wants Tony to retire. And honestly, you guys who keep saying that Tony needs to retire, Tony's too old, Tony is washed, Tony should have retired back in 2020. You guys need to respectfully shut the frick up. Because it seems to me that you guys have no idea what Tony Ferguson's grand plan is. I'm gonna break down Tony Ferguson's grand plan, and hopefully by the end of this video, you casuals can realize that we need to let Tony Ferguson cook no matter what. It all starts with this interview Tony Ferguson did with ESPN, and this is where my prediction starts in my head, that Tony Ferguson is here for something bigger. Tony talks about how he reunited with his old team, the team that made the people fear him.
We're training with a new team, my old team, classic fight team with Tyler Wombles and his guys. I haven't worked with them. We had a mutual friend that kind of burned everything up, but then we kind of rekindled a lot of stuff over the years. And then I finally reached out to him. And I said, hey, basically, let's work. And I showed up, and it was like we never missed a beat.
Tony also talks about how his mindset changed and how he needed to be put back into the position where he needed to learn again.
Like, you know what? You got to get your shit together, Tony. Like, it's like everybody says, oh, you're slower. Or I got tired of just hearing. I put myself in a better position with good people. Not like I said, not like I wasn't with bad people. It's just I have to put myself in positions where I can learn again and become a student again, and then go back and work with it. And fortunately, right now, I have a lot of good people around me.
And the reason why I bring this up is because this is the main source, the main bread and butter as to why Tony hasn't been himself lately, and that is his mindset. Tony specifically in this interview constantly reminds us that he got back to his original team and restarted his mind to where he needed to think like a student again. Tony is basically telling us that ever since he had that interim belt wrapped around his waist, he didn't progress any further in terms of skill. Tony even describes this feeling. He calls himself out.
If you don't get tested, if you don't have somebody testing you and teaching you new things, you start to plateau. You kind of keep up with the same thing, and then what you do is you stop learning. I'm back in that good position where I've been learning new stuff.
And just a heads up for the casuals out there, Tony Ferguson is not retiring anytime soon. Tony says this himself. Retirement hasn't even crossed his mind.
I got all these things, these people like putting all these ideas in my head. Hey, you need to retire. You need to retire. You need to retire. It never fazed me to want to retire. Like, I don't want to retire. It's not in my thought process.
And you know what else Tony said? To all the haters out there who are saying that Tony needs to retire, why don't you retire?
So that's the part that hurts, is when I get that question asked to me, because I'm like, I get all the like, what are you talking about? You know, like, hey, you're retired, right? I'm like, no, I'm not retired. Like, you go retire. Like,
at the end of this interview, Tony does give us a little hint about his grand master plan. Tony does talk about Conor McGregor and how he wants to fight Conor and how he has his eyes locked onto him.
You know, going after Khabib for a long time and going after McNuggets. This is about as close as it's going to get for right now. So as soon as we get through this, dude, we'll go after Conor.
And this right here is where my theory comes into play. Okay, so let me cook. We do know that Tony Ferguson got back to his original team that got him into champion level. We do also know that Tony Ferguson's mindset has changed to where he needs to learn again. He needs to go out there and ask for help. We do also know that Tony Ferguson isn't retiring anytime soon. And he also has his eyes on Conor McGregor. But that's not all. Tony Ferguson goes on another interview with ESPN and talks about Khabib and that he has a plan. And for all this time, all his losing streaks, he's trying to intentionally lure back Khabib back into the cage and have the fight that we all wanted. Tony Ferguson versus Khabib.
At any point over the last 6 losses, did you feel like you were accepting the defeat?
No, it's just taking fights so that way I can get Khabib to come back. And we almost coached against each other. So he took the bait. But something happened to him, so something different where he didn't even go coach Islam. So it took a lot for him to not want to be able to show up.
So I hope you casuals can finally understand and realize what Tony sees. His perspective. Now enough with the glazing. Let's get into my theory. Like I said before, Tony Ferguson has made it crystal clear that he is not retiring anytime soon. And he also wants to fight Conor McGregor and Khabib eventually, which makes me come up with a simple theory. I genuinely believe that Tony Ferguson will slowly but surely have his belt back. I don't know when, but all I know is that Tony Ferguson will become champion again. And when he does become champion, this is where Tony Ferguson will make history. Because you would think that when Tony Ferguson does get his belt back, he would immediately retire. But no, you're wrong, brother. He will defend his title against the one and only Conor McGregor, his dream fight. And after he mows down Conor, Khabib in the shadows is seeing all this, and he comes out of retirement and fights Tony Ferguson. And Tony Ferguson expected this obviously, because this is what Tony Ferguson wanted. He wanted to lure in the Dagestani back to him. And boom, the second title defense happens, and Tony Ferguson makes the world cry after he absolutely rear naked chokes Khabib. And now since Tony Ferguson has 2 successful title defenses against the biggest stars in the UFC, yet again, you would think that Tony Ferguson will drop down the gloves and retire. But no, you're wrong, brother, yet again. Tony El Kakui Ferguson will defend his belt again and again and again. And he will do this for 10 plus years. And mind you, he's doing all this around his 50s to 60s. And once he does have a successful title defense run, successful winning streak, all at the age of 60 years old, Tony Ferguson will retire from MMA forever. But not fighting. Tony Ferguson always wanted to box. And he always wanted to wrestle.
But, I always wanted to box. I always wanted to box. But I've always, found myself wishing and wanting so much, I almost forgot about my MMA. If this is my last MMA fight, what sport do you think I'm gonna go do? You know what I mean? Like, I've always wanted to go to the Olympics and go wrestling. At least we get to wear wrestling shoes. And there's a couple opens that are out there.
And that's exactly what he's gonna do after he retires from MMA. After a successful 12-fight win streak, he will move on to the professional boxing league and professional wrestling leagues and reach the top level, all at 70 years old. Tony Ferguson will be in the history books for the oldest active fighter ever. But not the oldest active fighter, just a fighter who dominated the fighting world for years. And that's what Tony is set to do. Tony Ferguson will be the oldest fighter ever in history.